He shouted before he even reached the door. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle now." His voice cut through the quiet street like a blade. No hesitation, no patience, no curiosity, only command, only suspicion, only a verdict formed in his mind before he saw her face. Aisha Thompson lifted her head with trembling hands, fighting the slow, cruel fog of her blood sugar crash. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt heavy, her breath thin. The officer repeated the order, louder this time, pushing his tone into something that sounded like frustration mixed with fear. I said, "Step out of the car." He read her weakness as defiance. He read her confusion as disrespect. He read her medical emergency as a threat. And he advanced with a hand already hovering over a weapon he did not need. Before we go into this story, tell me where you are watching from. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and give me a like so these voices can be heard. Aisha Thompson began her day long before the officer ever appeared in her world. Rising at 5:45 in the morning with a sense of purpose she carried every weekday. She woke quietly, breathing deeply as she checked her continuous glucose monitor. The number glowed steady at 112. Safe. Stable. A small victory she celebrated with a soft exhale because she knew how quickly things could shift. Her daughter, 7-year-old Amara, slept under a blanket decorated with small yellow stars. Aisha kissed her forehead, whispered a promise to pick her up on time, and held that moment close before starting the rhythm of her day. She dressed modestly, she tied her hair back, she packed her lunch, and she added an extra pack of glucose tabs to her purse because she never trusted a predictable day. At the preschool where she taught, 20 children called her Miss Aisha, with a joy that softened every edge life had ever carved into her. They painted butterflies. They practiced the alphabet. They laughed and ran and lived in the small, bright world she helped create for them. But Aisha knew her own body with the same precision she used in the classroom, and she felt something shift shortly before 4 in the afternoon. A tremor. A warning. A slight dip in the number she could feel even before she saw it. She reached into her desk for the emergency snack she usually kept there, then remembered she had eaten it that morning while reviewing lesson plans. She told herself she had time. She told herself she could drive the few miles home. She told herself she would be fine. By 3:50, her hands shook. By 4, she could feel the cold sweat soaking through her blouse. Her vision tightened. Her breath grew shallow. She forced herself to remain calm as she walked to her old Honda Accord, telling herself she only needed a moment, only needed one glucose tab, only needed a little more strength to make it home and see her daughter again. She drove slowly, each second heavier than the last, until the world began to tilt. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled so hard the wheel vibrated beneath her palms. She knew she could not continue. She pulled her car to the curb, pressed the hazard lights, and whispered a prayer that she had not waited too long. She leaned over to reach her purse and felt the first wave of confusion roll through her. The glucose tabs spilled across the passenger floor, small white discs scattering out of reach. She tried to follow them with her eyes, but the shapes blurred. She found her phone, but her fingers slipped across the screen, too unsteady to push the right numbers. She tried again and again, and then the phone fell from her grasp and hit the floorboard. "Not today," she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice. "Please, not today." Her blood sugar continued to fall, slow at first, and then sharply, like a trap door giving way beneath her. Her breath felt shallow. Her thoughts clouded. She placed her trembling hand on the wheel and forced herself to stay awake. She reached for the bracelet on her wrist, the silver band engraved with the words, "Type 1 diabetic, insulin dependent." She raised her arm to make sure anyone who approached could see it. But the first person to approach did not look for a bracelet. He looked for a problem. Officer Derek Harlan stood outside her window and saw a car stopped at an angle he did not like. He saw a woman slumped over. He saw sweat on her brow. He saw slow speech and glassy eyes. To him, these details were not symptoms. They were accusations. He made his assumption in a single, irreversible breath, and once he made it, nothing else mattered. He tapped on the window, already certain he knew what he was dealing with. He did not see the bracelet. He did not see the pale skin under her eyes. He did not see a medical emergency. He saw a story he had told himself many times, a drunk driver he needed to stop. Aisha struggled to lift her hand. Her bracelet glinted. She whispered, "Type 1 diabetic. Needs sugar." Her voice cracked. Her body sagged. Derek looked straight at the bracelet. His body camera recorded the moment with cold clarity. He dismissed it in seconds. "I'm not falling for that today," he said, his tone firm and final. That sentence marked the moment their lives split. One path toward survival, one path toward a mistake that would haunt him forever. But in that moment, he felt certain he was right, and she felt herself slipping further, unable to fight the misunderstanding swallowing her whole. Aisha tried to form another sentence. She tried to say her daughter's name. She tried to hold on to consciousness, but her hands shook harder, her vision narrowed, and her breath thinned into small, shallow gasps she could barely control. The car felt distant. The world felt faint, and she knew she had only moments left before her mind faded completely. Her day had begun with purpose, with routine, with love. It was about to shatter under the weight of one officer's assumptions, one medical crisis, and one tragic misjudgment that would change both of their lives forever. Derek Harlan had been on the force for 7 months, but his need to prove himself had been building for years. He carried that need like armor, forged from silence at home and the long shadow of a father who spent 3 decades as a police sergeant and never once said the words Derek wanted to hear. "I'm proud of you." He waited for that sentence through childhood, through high school, through 2 tours in Iraq, through nights when explosions shook the sky and mornings when the battlefield looked too much like the corners of his own mind. But his father's silence stayed. So Derek promised himself he would become the kind of officer the old man could respect. Every traffic stop, every arrest, every call. He treated each moment as a test he could not afford to fail. Earlier that week, another officer made a routine DUI arrest, and Derek heard the praise that followed. He watched a sergeant pat that officer on the back. He watched the approval he wanted so desperately. He went home that night repeating the same thought. "I need one. Just one. Then maybe I matter." The pressure sat deep in his chest, heavy enough that he sometimes mistook it for strength. By Wednesday afternoon, the pressure felt like purpose. He saw an opportunity in every stopped car, every driver who hesitated, every small detail that he could spin into a win. When he spotted Aisha's Honda sitting at an angle with the hazard lights blinking, something clicked inside him. Not caution, not compassion. It was something sharper, shaped by the stories he told himself. This is it. This is the one. He turned on his body camera. He straightened his uniform, and he approached the car with a mind already writing the ending. A woman slumped, a possible DUI, a chance to prove he could read the streets as well as any veteran, a chance to earn what he believed he'd been denied for years. He reached the window and saw a black woman struggling to keep her head upright. Her forehead glistened with sweat. Her breath came in uneven waves. Her words slipped from her lips slowly, shaped by confusion and fear. To Derek, none of this pointed to danger. It pointed to guilt. He saw slurred speech. He saw a drooping posture. He saw weakness he interpreted as irresponsibility. And once he labeled her in his mind, He did not question his assumptions. His training said assess. His instinct said accuse. His untreated trauma said act fast before the world turned against him. Aisha's hands shook as she lifted her wrist. The silver bracelet caught the light and reflected it directly toward him. Type 1 diabetic, she whispered. Need sugar. Her voice was thin, almost lost. She spoke as someone fighting to stay conscious, but Derek had heard the word diabetic used during another stop weeks earlier. A driver had tried to avoid a sobriety test with the claim of low blood sugar. Derek remembered the laughter of the older officers afterward. He remembered the words, "They'll say anything to get out of it." He remembered the pride in joining the room's laughter, and he remembered telling himself he would never be fooled. So when Aisha lifted her arm, he looked straight at the bracelet, registered the words, and dismissed them all in 2 seconds. His own voice answered before his mind had even processed her condition. "I'm not falling for that today." He said it with the authority he craved, with the confidence he had spent years faking, with the conviction of someone who believed he finally had a moment that would prove his worth, and that conviction locked him into a choice he would never be able to undo. Aisha tried again. She shaped a sentence through trembling lips, but her muscles weakened. Her thoughts blurred. Her body leaned toward the door as if gravity itself was slipping. Her breath grew short. The world around her dimmed. She was falling into a medical crisis her body could no longer fight. Derek saw the slump and believed it was avoidance. He saw her eyes unfocused and believed it was intoxication. He saw her distress and believed it was disrespect. His assumptions replaced reality, and each second made him more certain he was right. He opened the door with force. Aisha's head tilted. Her shoulders sagged. She tried to brace herself, but her limbs refused to respond. She fell toward the pavement, her body folding under the weight of her falling blood sugar. Derek saw the collapse not as surrender but as resistance, a choice, not a symptom. And that misinterpretation set the next chain of actions in motion. He stepped back, pulse rising, posture rigid. His mind convinced itself she was hiding something. His training told him to slow down. His instinct told him to tighten control. His fear told him to take command. He stepped forward again, convinced speed equaled safety. His voice sharpened, his tone hardened, and in those moments, he forgot to ask the questions that could have saved them both. He forgot to pause. He forgot to listen. His certainty swallowed every warning sign. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 30 seconds from the moment he approached her window to the moment he made a decision that would haunt every year that followed. 30 seconds where her body begged for help and his ego urged him to act. 30 seconds where one life was fading and the other was tightening its grip on the wrong conclusion. 30 seconds where truth stood inches from his face, engraved on a bracelet he refused to read. And while Aisha whispered for strength, Derek believed he had found his moment to stand tall. He believed he had found the arrest that would validate him. He believed the scene unfolding stayed within his control. He had no idea that this decision would end his career, unravel his life, and follow him into every sleepless night for years to come. He believed he was acting with confidence. He did not realize he was acting with fear. He believed he was taking command. He did not realize he was losing judgment. He believed he saw a drunk driver. He did not realize he was staring at a medical emergency that was stealing a young mother's consciousness in real time. 30 seconds. That was all it took to lock his mind, close his heart, and seal the fate of two lives that had never met until this moment. And as Aisha whispered her daughter's name under fading breath, Derek took another step forward, convinced he was in the right, unaware he was walking into the greatest mistake of his life. The moment Derek pulled the door open, the crisis became unmistakable. Aisha's body gave out completely. Her legs folded beneath her as if the ground slipped out from under her feet. She collapsed forward, hands scraping against the hard surface as she tried to protect her head. Her breath thinned. Her eyes lost focus. Her muscles trembled without rhythm or control. She fell not because she resisted, but because her blood sugar had dropped into a range where the brain could barely stay awake. But Derek did not see a medical emergency. He saw a refusal. He saw a threat. He saw a situation slipping away from him, and he tightened his grip on the only thing he believed he could control. He ordered her to stand. His voice rose with pressure, not discipline. Aisha tried to lift herself, but her palms slid. Her strength faded faster than she could recover it. She whispered for help, but the words broke in the middle, fading into a soft breath no one could understand. Derek looked down, mistaking her weakness for defiance. His identity as an officer felt questioned. His confidence felt challenged. His fear sat beneath the surface, hardened by years of unspoken trauma he had never addressed, and he reacted the way fear often reacts when armed with authority. He escalated. He pulled his taser from its holster in one motion. He pressed the device against her shoulder. The metal prongs touched her skin. She turned her head with the last ounce of awareness she had left and tried to say her condition again. Her voice trembled. Her words broke. Her arm shook. Her bracelet, bent slightly from the fall, still shined under the fading light. Derek did not look at it. He issued one final warning he had no intention of slowing down to consider, and then he pulled the trigger. The current hit her body with violent force. Her back arched, her hands clenched, her jaw tightened. The shock coursed through her muscles and overwhelmed her failing nervous system. Her body did not resist. It seized, and the pain tore through every remaining thread of consciousness she had left. Aisha let out one short cry, cut off halfway as her breath collapsed. She fell again, this time harder. Her shoulder struck the ground, her knee twisted awkwardly, her cheek pressed against the surface as her body tried to remember how to breathe. Neighbors stepped outside when they heard the sound. Doors opened, phones appeared, faces showed fear and confusion, but Derek saw none of it as a signal to reassess. He saw the gathering eyes as a challenge to his authority. He threatened them with arrest if they stepped closer. His voice grew sharper. His hand shook slightly. And in that shaking lived every memory he had tried to bury. 2 tours in Iraq, nights awake with noise in his head, days spent pretending he was fine, moments where every loud sound made his heart jump. He did not recognize these feelings as trauma. He interpreted them as urgency, and that urgency pointed at the wrong target. Aisha tried once more to lift her head. She whispered a name, Amara. It slipped out, soft and fractured. Not a plea, not an argument. Just a mother calling out the one thing that anchored her to the world she loved. But Derek did not hear it as a name. He heard it as noise, a sound he could not place. He reached for her arm and pulled. Her skin dragged across the rough concrete as he yanked her closer. The motion tore the thin layers of her forearm. Blood surfaced in small, sharp streaks across her skin. He pulled again, dragging her farther, 6 feet. A small distance measured by concrete, but a long journey through pain she could no longer process. Her bracelet bent under the force. The edge pressed against her wrist bone, leaving a growing red mark. Her hands trembled. Her breathing became shallow and irregular. Her pulse raced as her brain starved for glucose. She whispered again, but the words dissolved before they reached air. She had no fight left. She had no strength. She had no time. Derek reached for his handcuffs. Metal clicked sharply as he locked her wrists behind her back. The pressure tightened the bracelet even more, digging into her skin with each small movement. She winced. Her body sagged. Her head drooped. Her blood sugar fell faster, 42, then 40, then lower. Slipping into a dangerous range her brain could no longer sustain. She needed glucose. She needed help. She needed someone to recognize what was happening. But the one person who stood over her, believed he was saving the public from harm. He lifted her by the arms, her body limp and unresponsive. Her feet dragged across the ground as he moved her to the back seat of his cruiser. She tried to form one more sentence before consciousness finally broke. "Tell my baby." Her voice cracked. Her words disappeared. She slumped into the seat. Her head hit the window softly. Her breathing slowed to shallow, uneven gasps, and then her body went still. Derek looked into the mirror, saw her eyes closed, and told himself she was sleeping it off. He had no idea that her blood sugar was now falling toward a level that caused seizures, brain injury, or death. He shut the door, convinced the situation was under control, in his mind. He had acted with authority, in his mind. He had prevented danger, in his mind. He had followed instinct, but the truth sat quiet and unspoken in the back seat. Aisha was slipping deeper into medical crisis. She was minutes from irreversible harm. Her body was shutting down. Her mind was fading. Her breath was slowing, and the officer who held the power to save her believed the opposite of reality. He returned to the driver's seat and radioed a generic code, not mentioning her condition. He did not request medical help. He did not call for support. He did not pause long enough to consider the possibility he was wrong. His certainty had locked his judgment. His fear had fueled his decisions. His ego had silenced every sign that pointed toward truth. The result was a tragedy still unfolding behind him. Aisha sat unconscious, chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. Her bracelet lay pressed against the metal cuff, bent, scratched, and ignored. Her life depended on seconds she no longer controlled, and with each passing moment, her blood sugar continued its dangerous fall. She needed intervention. She needed recognition. She needed someone to see what Derek refused to see. As he pulled away from the curb, convinced the arrest was complete, the crisis traveled with him. A mother was fighting for her life in the back seat. A child waited for her at after-school care, and an officer driven by pressure, pride, and unhealed wounds had no idea he had just crossed a line that would alter every year ahead. The moment the cruiser pulled away from the curb, Aisha's life depended on seconds Derek did not realize he was wasting. Her body sagged against the seat, head tilted, breath thin and shallow. Her eyes stayed closed as her blood sugar continued to fall. 38, 35, then lower. Her mind drifted in and out, trapped between faint awareness and complete unconsciousness. Her hands twitched slightly, then stilled. Her lips lost color. Her pulse weakened. She was slipping into a place where the brain began to shut down to preserve what little energy remained. But Derek did not see any of this. He drove as if he were transporting someone who would wake up annoyed, not someone fighting for life. Traffic slowed the cruiser to a crawl. Cars filled the lanes. Horns echoed faintly. Derek glanced once toward the back seat, saw her still body, and assumed she was resting. She'll sleep it off. He muttered. He believed the sentence. He clung to it, repeating it softly, as if those words could turn his assumptions into truth. He did not see the signs of medical collapse. He did not notice her chest rising too slowly. He did not hear her breath catching in irregular intervals. He saw only what he expected to see, a drunk driver sobering up, and because that belief felt familiar, he trusted it without question. Aisha's body leaned sideways as the car turned. Her cheek pressed against the window. Her breathing slowed again. Her brain struggled to function on the tiny amount of glucose still circulating. She tried once to lift her fingers. They barely moved. She tried to speak her daughter's name. Her tongue would not form the sound. She tried to open her eyes. They stayed closed, inside her chest. Her heartbeat stumbled, then steadied, then stumbled again. She had minutes before the brain began to slip into irreversible damage. Her medical bracelet remained trapped between skin and metal, bent under the pressure of the handcuffs, the engraving pressed against her wrist. The words that could have saved her stayed out of sight and out of mind. No one was looking. No one was listening. And no one inside that cruiser understood how quickly a diabetic crash could turn fatal. Every mile the car traveled pushed her closer to the edge. The cruiser reached the station at a steady pace. Derek parked with a confidence that made him believe the situation was routine. He opened the back door and expected resistance. He expected anger. He expected complaints. But what he found instead was silence. Aisha did not lift her head. She did not move. Her chest barely rose. He froze for a moment, caught between confusion and disbelief. He grabbed her arm and felt her body fall heavily toward him. Dead weight. No response. Her skin felt cold. Her pulse fluttered weakly under his fingers. He did not understand what he was touching. He dragged her from the car, trying to convince himself she was exaggerating. Her feet scraped the floor with each pull. Her wrist bent painfully against the cuff. Her head drooped forward, hair brushing against her face without movement. Derek tightened his jaw, refusing to see what was happening. He forced her across the booking area, unaware of the blood streaks left behind from the earlier fall. Her body swayed in his grip. Her chest rose once, then paused, then rose again, slower than before. Jamal Reyes entered the room at that exact moment. He expected a routine blood draw for a standard DUI. He carried his equipment with practiced calm. But the second he saw Aisha, his training took over. He did not see a drunk driver. He saw a diabetic crisis. He saw the pale lips, the slow breathing, the sagging posture. He saw the bent bracelet crushed under the metal cuff. His eyes widened. His voice rose instantly. "Uncuff her now." Derek hesitated. Jamal repeated the command. Louder, firmer, unmistakably urgent. "Now! She's crashing." The cuffs came off. Jamal knelt beside her and lifted her wrist, straightening the bracelet just enough to read the engraving. The words confirmed what his instincts already knew. He reached into his bag, pulled out a glucose meter, and pricked her finger. The device beeped. The number flashed. 32. A level where confusion becomes coma. A level where the brain starts shutting down. A level where minutes decide survival. He opened a tube of glucose gel and pressed it into her cheek. He spoke calmly, using a voice steady enough to guide her back. "Stay with me. Stay with me." He tilted her head to keep her airway open. He elevated her legs. He checked her pulse again. The rhythm had grown thin and uneven. He looked up at the officers around him and shouted for an ambulance. His voice shook with urgency. "She's not drunk. She's dying." Aisha's chest suddenly stilled. For 4 long seconds, there was no breath. Jamal reacted instantly. 2 rescue breaths. 1, 2. Her chest lifted slightly under each one. He pressed his ear near her mouth. A faint gasp surfaced. She returned to shallow breathing, fragile and uneven. He started compressions when her pulse faltered again. His hands moved in steady rhythm. His voice remained calm, guiding every step. The body camera recorded everything, every breath, every compression, every frantic second. Derek stood frozen. He watched the paramedic fight for the life he had ignored. He watched the consequences of his assumptions take shape. He watched a woman he believed was intoxicated hover between life and death on the station floor. He felt something break inside him, but he did not know what to call it. Shame, fear, recognition, it all mixed together, silent and heavy. He said nothing. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics transferred her to a stretcher, moving quickly as they hooked oxygen, checked her pulse, and prepared an IV infusion of dextrose. Jamal followed them out, still giving instructions, still focused on saving her. Aisha's eyelids fluttered once. Her fingers twitched. Then she went still again as the doors closed. The station fell silent after the ambulance pulled away. Officers stared at the floor. Some glanced at Derek with eyes full of questions he could not answer. He walked to a corner and sank into a chair. Unable to move, unable to speak. His heart pounded, his throat tightened. The reality of what he had done pressed hard against him. One decision, one assumption, one refusal to listen, and a young mother had nearly died on his watch. Outside. The ambulance sped toward the hospital. Inside. Aisha's body fought to rise above the damage. Her future depended on how quickly the sugar reached her brain. Her life depended on treatment arriving in time. And the video of her collapse, her drag across the pavement, her failing breath, and the moment she nearly slipped away had been recorded in full. The truth was now preserved. Every second, every word, every mistake. And the consequences would soon reach far beyond the walls of that station. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez sat alone in the small review room. The body camera footage cued to the moment Officer Derek Harlan stepped out of his cruiser. She watched the screen with steady focus, prepared for a difficult case, but not for what unfolded in front of her. She pressed play. The first seconds passed. She saw Aisha in the front seat of her car, slumped, sweating, barely conscious. She saw the bracelet glint when Aisha raised her arm. She saw Derek's eyes land on it. She watched him dismiss it. And in those 2 seconds, her breath grew heavy in her chest. She knew what she was seeing before the footage advanced. She had watched her nephew collapse once during a dangerous low. She had seen the confusion in his eyes, the trembling in his hands, the way his words lost shape. Watching Aisha, she saw the same signs. It took only moments for the truth to settle in her mind. This was not intoxication. This was a medical emergency ignored. The footage continued. Elena leaned forward, her jaw tightening as Derek opened the door and Aisha collapsed. She heard the officer's sharp commands. She heard Aisha's faint words. She saw the silver bracelet pressed against her skin. She watched Derek reach for his taser without hesitation. She watched the shock ripple through Aisha's body. Her hands tightened into fists. She paused the video. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she exhaled slowly and pressed play again because her duty required her to see every second. She watched the dragging. She watched the blood. She watched the handcuffs forced over the bracelet. She watched Aisha's body slump into the back seat. She listened to Derek mutter, "She'll sleep it off." She felt anger rise in her chest, not the uncontrolled kind, but the kind shaped by responsibility. She had served 19 years. She had trained hundreds of officers. She had seen mistakes. She had seen fear. But she had rarely seen a moment where a life could have been saved with one sentence, one pause, one breath of humility. And she watched this moment pass unrecognized. She advanced to the station footage. She watched Aisha unresponsive on the floor, Derek standing nearby, uncertain and silent. She watched paramedic Jamal Reyes kneel beside her, read the bracelet in seconds, and react with a clarity that came from both training and compassion. She heard him shout for the cuffs to come off. She saw the number on the meter flash on the camera, 32. She knew the danger immediately. She had lived it with her nephew. She knew how quickly the brain starved at that level. She watched Jamal give rescue breaths when Aisha's chest stilled. She watched the compressions. She watched the urgency. She watched the difference between someone who recognized a crisis and someone who refused to. The footage shook her more deeply than she admitted. She closed the file, leaned back in her chair, and pressed her fingers to her temple. For a long moment, the room stayed still. She knew what would come next. She knew the department could not ignore what she had just witnessed, and she knew the public would not forgive silence. She stood up, steadying herself, and walked to the chief's office with a copy of the footage under her arm. Within 24 hours. Officer Harlan was placed on immediate suspension without pay. The decision was quick because the evidence was overwhelming. Elena drafted the disciplinary notes in precise language. Failure to render aid, excessive force, gross negligence, dismissal of visible medical identification. Each phrase carried weight. Each phrase defined what had gone wrong. Each phrase reflected the truth the camera refused to hide, while the suspension took effect. Another truth emerged from within the department. Officer Kayla Brooks knocked quietly on Elena's door with a troubled expression. She asked to speak off the record. Elena gave a slow nod. Kayla stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and held out her phone, the screen displaying an audio recording from earlier that week. Derek's voice played through the speaker. "I'm not letting another drunk play the medical card on me. Not again." His tone carried arrogance. His words carried prejudice. His certainty carried danger. Elena listened without interruption. When the recording ended, Kayla's voice trembled. "I should have come sooner. I did not think he would go this far." Elena thanked her for bringing it forward. She meant the words. Courage inside a department often came quietly, often came late. But it still mattered. She saved the recording as evidence. She added it to the file. She sent it to Internal Affairs with a note that read, "Supplemental misconduct, personnel safety concerns, disregard for medical protocol." She sealed the record and prepared for the long process ahead. The internal investigation began immediately. Each interview, each timeline, each review of policy made the picture clearer. Derek's actions were not a momentary lapse. They were a pattern of unchecked confidence combined with untreated trauma. His supervisors noted that he had been impatient. His peers noted he dismissed training reminders. His record showed no previous complaints. But the culture around him showed silence that had become habit. As the investigation deepened, the reality grew undeniable. This was preventable. This was avoidable. And this was a violation of the oath the department required. 4 weeks after the incident. The final report sat on Elena's desk. She read it twice. She signed the last page. And she forwarded it to the chief with a recommendation for termination. The chief needed less than an hour to review the evidence. He signed the order. Derek's employment ended that night. The words were clear. Terminated for cause. The reason was recorded in full. The certification board would receive the report. The public would receive the statement, and the department would bear its own measure of accountability. When the certification review board met, the decision was swift. His license to serve as a law enforcement officer in the state was revoked permanently. No reinstatement, no appeal, no second chance. The board issued the ruling with a single sentence that carried quiet finality. This officer's conduct demonstrates a persistent inability to assess risk, respond to medical emergencies, and uphold the standards of public safety. Derek received the termination letter the same day his wife packed her bags. She walked quietly through their home, placing her belongings in boxes with a grief shaped not by surprise, but by exhaustion. Their marriage had been unraveling long before this incident, strained by silence, burdened by fear, anchored by promises he could not keep. She handed him the envelope. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him. She only said, "I hope you get help." And then she left. The footage continued to circulate inside the department. Officers watched it with solemn faces. Some shook their heads, some stayed silent. Some asked how something so clear could be missed by someone trained to protect. The questions spread through the halls, heavy with regret. Elena stood before a small group of supervisors days later and spoke the words she knew mattered most. The camera does not blink. It does not soften what we ignore. It does not hide what we refuse to see. She paused. Her voice softened. This is not only about discipline. This is about recognition. This is about responsibility. Her words echoed in the room because everyone understood the truth. The footage did not only expose one mistake, it exposed the cost of assumptions. It exposed the danger of unchecked certainty. It exposed the difference between authority and duty. And as the department prepared for the public release of the footage, everyone knew the same reality. What was recorded could not be undone. What happened to Aisha could not be erased. And the world was about to watch every second. Civil rights attorney Marcus Lee watched the footage twice before he took the case. He sat in his quiet office, hands folded, mind steady, heart aching. He had handled difficult cases, but this one carried a weight he felt immediately. The facts were not tangled. The evidence was not hidden. The truth lived in every second of that recording. Aisha Thompson had not only been denied care, she had been denied recognition of her humanity. Marcus called her within hours. His voice was calm, steady, protective. "You deserved better," he told her. Aisha listened with slow breaths, still recovering from the trauma, still learning to trust the world after it failed her so deeply. She agreed to meet. She agreed to fight. And Marcus began preparing a legal argument that would not rely on emotion alone, but on the undeniable record captured by a camera that never blinked. He filed suit against the city of Denver and Officer Derek Harlan personally. The complaint was direct. It documented every step of the encounter, every moment of neglect, every violation of duty. It showed the bracelet. It showed the fall. It showed the taser pressed against a body in medical crisis. It showed the dragging. It showed the handcuffs. It showed the failing breath. It showed the unconscious body carried into the station. It showed the paramedic shouting for immediate help. It showed the numbers on the glucose meter. It showed everything. The city attorneys reviewed the footage and understood what Marcus already knew. This case could not survive a courtroom. A jury would need minutes, not days. The risk of trial was not financial alone. It was moral. It was public. It was historic. And Aisha's suffering was unarguable. Negotiations began quietly, with the city offering a settlement that reflected the gravity of the incident. After weeks of discussion, the city agreed to pay $650,000. It was a number that reflected accountability, not charity. Marcus explained the terms carefully. Aisha listened, hands folded, voice quiet. She accepted because she wanted closure, not conflict. But the case against Derek himself remained. Marcus pursued punitive damages. He believed the law must speak directly to the officer responsible. The court reviewed the evidence, weighed the conduct, and determined that Derek's actions met the threshold for personal liability. He was ordered to pay $135,000 in punitive damages. The amount was more than he could afford. It was more than he could imagine. It was more than he could carry. Derek filed for bankruptcy soon after. His home was sold. His savings disappeared. His reputation collapsed. And with it, the life he once believed he was building. He moved into his mother's small house on the outskirts of the city. He slept in a room that had not changed since high school. Trophies on the shelf, posters on the wall, a bed too small for a grown man. He woke each morning in silence. He sat at the edge of the mattress and stared at the floor. Some days he walked to the kitchen. Some days he did not. He watched the body camera footage on his cracked laptop, unable to look away from the moment he dismissed the bracelet. He replayed those seconds again and again. He studied his own face. He listened to his own voice. He heard the certainty he once felt and now could not understand. He whispered apologies to a screen that could not hear him. He whispered apologies to a woman he had nearly killed. He whispered apologies to a daughter he had never met. The weight of his actions pressed into him until he felt smaller than the uniform he once wore. His wife did not return. Their marriage had not survived the silence that followed the incident. She sent one message months later. "Take care of yourself. Nothing more." Derek wanted to respond but could not shape the words. He felt unworthy of them. He took a job washing dishes at a diner on the night shift. His hands smelled of soap and metal by morning. The work was quiet. The pay was low. The shift allowed him to avoid people. He spoke little. He ate little. He slept irregularly. His therapist suggested treatment for trauma and depression. Derek attended twice, then stopped. He believed he did not deserve healing. He carried his guilt like armor turned inward. While Derek unraveled, Aisha began rebuilding her life with slow, cautious steps. She used part of the settlement to create the Second Chance Medical Training Fund, an organization devoted to one goal: teaching officers how to recognize diabetic emergencies. She worked with doctors. She consulted with paramedics. She trained instructors across the state. In the first 18 months, more than 8,000 officers completed the program. She stood before classrooms of recruits with a gentle voice and a firm message. A bracelet is not an excuse. It is a warning. It is a life in your hands. Her story spread across the country. The body camera footage reached 25 million views in a single week. News stations discussed the case. Medical experts explained the signs of hypoglycemia. Advocates called for reform. Legislators took notice. Colorado passed a new law requiring every police academy to provide comprehensive medical emergency training. With diabetic crises included as a mandatory module, Aisha's case was named in the legislative summary. She read the document quietly, tears in her eyes, understanding the depth of what had changed. Her suffering had become a catalyst. Her pain had become a standard, and her voice had become something larger than she ever intended. Marcus Lee, after the settlement finalized, visited her one afternoon to deliver the final paperwork. They sat at her dining table. Her daughter played quietly in the next room. Aisha thanked him with a sincerity that softened the air around them. Marcus shook his head. "You did the hard part," he said. "I only told the truth. You survived." She looked down at her hands, traced the edge of her medical bracelet, and nodded with a slow, steady breath. But healing came in uneven waves. Aisha struggled with flashbacks. Sirens made her freeze. Nightmares broke her sleep. Crowded rooms drained her. She spoke with a therapist twice a week, learning to breathe through the fear that still lived in her chest. She loved her daughter deeply. But some days, she found herself holding Amara too tightly, afraid of losing her without warning. She began wearing a new medical bracelet with a built-in GPS alert. She checked it often. She touched it when she felt unsteady. It became both protection and reminder. The world around her changed because of what she endured. Derek's world collapsed because of what he failed to see. And the city learned a lesson written in the sharp, unforgiving clarity of recorded truth. The price had been paid, not in a courtroom alone, but in the quiet spaces where regret, recovery, and responsibility take root. And as the law changed, as the training expanded, as the public watched and learned, one truth remained. Aisha's life had been endangered by ignorance. It was saved by recognition, and now it would help save others. 8 months passed before Aisha could stand near a police cruiser without her breath tightening. The memory of that day lived inside her body, surfacing without permission, shaping her reactions in ways she could not always control. Sirens made her pause. Flashing lights made her chest tighten. Sudden voices behind her made her turn with fear she tried to hide. Trauma had become a quiet companion. She carried it the way people carry old injuries, invisible to others, heavy to herself. She worked. She raised her daughter. She led her foundation. But some moments reopened without warning, reminding her how close she had come to never seeing her child again. Amara, now 8, asked questions that cut deeper than any wound. "Why did the police hurt you?" "Mommy," she asked it softly. with the innocence of a child who believed the world should protect good people. Aisha tried to answer with honesty and gentleness. She held her daughter close and said, "Some people make mistakes because they do not understand what they see. My job now is to help them learn." But inside, she carried the echo of that day, the fear, the confusion, the electric shock, the cold handcuffs, the fading breath, the knowledge that her daughter almost lost her forever. Aisha attended therapy twice a week. She sat in the quiet room, hands clasped, voice steady but fragile. She talked about the moments when her mind returned to the sidewalk. She talked about the way her body froze when she felt a tremor in her fingers. She talked about the guilt she carried, even though she knew none of this was her fault. She talked about the weight of surviving. Healing was slow. Healing was uneven. Healing was work. But she faced it with the same strength she carried when she pulled her car to the curb to keep others safe. She rebuilt herself piece by piece. Her foundation grew faster than she expected. The Second Chance Medical Training Fund trained thousands of officers. Departments called from across the country, asking for instruction, asking for guidance, asking for understanding. She became a reluctant public figure, known not for tragedy alone, but for leadership born from pain. She spoke at conferences. She met with lawmakers. She stood before classrooms of recruits and explained the reality of diabetic crises. She held her bracelet up and said, "This is not a decoration. This is a warning. When someone lifts their wrist, they are asking you to look, to truly look." Her voice carried authority because it carried lived truth. Across the city, Derek lived a life shaped by regret. He worked nights at the diner, washing dishes until his hands cracked from hot water and soap. He walked home after midnight, head down, shoulders tense, avoiding the world he once believed he could protect. He lived with guilt that grew heavier each month. He watched the footage of the incident more times than he could count. Some nights he stared at the screen until tears blurred his vision. He listened to Aisha's voice. He watched her collapse. He watched himself ignore the bracelet. He watched the moment he chose pride over responsibility. He whispered apologies that no one heard. He carried remorse like a weight that refused to loosen. He attended therapy briefly, then stopped because he could not face the thought of being forgiven. He believed he did not deserve it. His depression deepened. His isolation grew. Some nights he sat outside the diner, staring at the dark street, wondering how a single moment could redefine an entire life. He had once imagined a long career, a family, a home filled with stability. Now he lived with the knowledge that he nearly ended a life through certainty he never earned. His uniform was gone. His badge was gone. His marriage was gone. His identity had collapsed. And what remained was the quiet ache of responsibility he could not escape. Meanwhile, paramedic Jamal Reyes received the department's life-saving medal at a small ceremony. The room was filled with colleagues who had witnessed the footage. They applauded as he accepted the honor with calm humility. He did not view himself as a hero. He viewed himself as a professional who recognized the signs others missed. He never forgot the moment Aisha stopped breathing. He remembered the fear in those 4 seconds of stillness. He remembered the relief when she gasped again. He kept the case report on his desk as a reminder of how quickly life can shift from danger to safety, from despair to hope. He followed Aisha's recovery quietly, cheering for her from a respectful distance. Months later, Aisha appeared on national television at the invitation of a major news network. She wore a simple blouse and a new medical bracelet with a built-in GPS alert. She sat with dignity, hands folded, voice steady. She told her story not with anger but with clarity. She spoke about the fall, the shock, the dragging, the coma, the fear of never seeing her daughter again. She spoke about the importance of medical recognition. She spoke about the responsibility officers carry in every encounter. She spoke about forgiveness, but not for the sake of the officer, for the sake of her own healing. Her words were measured. Her tone was calm. Her truth was powerful. The host asked her one question that resonated across the country. What do you want people to understand most? Aisha looked into the camera, eyes clear, voice unwavering. If tomorrow it is your mother, your child, your spouse having a low, she said, will the next officer stop long enough to read the bracelet? Because I begged him to read mine. And he did not. The studio stayed silent. Her bracelet glinted gently under the lights. The message was unmistakable. Her appearance reached millions. It sparked renewed discussions in state legislatures. It prompted additional police departments to adopt medical emergency protocols. It inspired families living with diabetes to advocate for clearer identification. Her words became part of training videos, classroom modules, and community programs nationwide. In her quiet moments, Aisha reflected on everything she had endured. She held her daughter close during bedtime stories. She touched her bracelet when fear crept into her voice. She allowed herself to feel pride in the lives her story might save. She understood that her scars would remain, not as open wounds, but as reminders of strength, survival, and purpose. And somewhere in the city, Derek sat alone, watching her television interview on a small screen. He listened to her words with a heart heavy with regret. He whispered, "I'm sorry." He knew she would never hear it. He knew he could never undo what he had done. But he whispered it anyway because some truths demand to be spoken even when no one is listening. As the screen faded to black, a final message appeared in soft, simple text, a sentence that captured the heart of the story and the lesson carved from pain. One glance could have saved us both. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, please subscribe to the channel, give me a like, and share it so more people can hear these voices. Your support helps keep these stories alive.